You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Love is a Croc. This episode seems more like a croc. But first, before we get to that...
That's a preview, friends. That is a preview of this conversation. This episode, kind of a croc. But unfortunately, there's a couple of things we have to cover first.
Yes, so we just want to make a little caveat or announcement for you. Like many of you listeners out there likely discovered, similar to how Joshua and I discovered, good news. Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond going to HBO Max. So if you're an HBO Max subscriber, that's great news for you. If you're on DC Universe, though, maybe not as good news for you. I don't know all the ins and outs personally of what's going on in DC Universe, but what we do know is they are currently in the process of migrating shows from DC Universe over to HBO Max. And in light of that, that means that there is a stopgap between when we lost Batman the Animated Series for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and Batman Beyond for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. Good news is, if you're listening to this recording, both of those are available on HBO Max, so you can at least access them if you are willing to work it into your budget or reallocate those funds that you're spending on DC Universe towards HBO Max.
Now let me swing in with the bad news.
Yes.
This bad news we speak of is that Superman the Animated Series has also been taken down from DC Universe in preparation for it becoming a many-headed hydra of marketing as DC Universe Infinite. But Superman has not yet been migrated over to HBO Max, nor is there an official date when that is going to happen. Now, Caleb and I have discussed this a lot, and we've chosen to see it as a potentially positive idea that they're maybe doing a remaster on it like they did for Batman the Animated Series and New Batman Adventures. Maybe that's what the deal is, but nevertheless, in the meantime, those episodes of Superman are simply not available anywhere, and there is no end in sight for that situation. This makes it very difficult for you, our loyal listeners, to watch along with us unless you also own the physical media, which we do, or I should say, Caleb and I own all of Batman and all of Superman between us.
Yes.
Neither one of us actually owns both.
That is correct. I own Batman Beyond and Batman the Animated Series, and Joshua owns the Superman DVDs. However, we do not neither of us own all of them. So we are currently looking at trying to overcome the challenge by getting creative on how we can best watch the episodes and record on them so we can keep with our current cadence. However, we just wanted to make that note so that you can bear with us in the case that our schedule changes suddenly or we have to pivot to a different cadence.
All right, I think that's enough bookkeeping, a little bit behind the scenes stuff that we wanted to make clear for our listeners, both on our behalf, and so that fewer of you were consternated to discover these things by accident. Let's move into the discussion of Love is a Croc. Again, let me reiterate, it's not great. And I think that one of the designs kind of leans into that lack of greatness, and the other one just raises questions. Let's start with Baby Doll, an unwelcome return. Caleb, tell me, how do you feel about Baby Doll's return?
I know we were all just aching. Deep down, we really wanted Baby Doll. We wanted to see the Baby Doll redesign. It is the one we were all asking for furiously. And, lo and behold, they delivered us with one of the best, most original Batman the Animated Series characters getting an overhaul with the best design of all time. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Nobody asked for Baby Doll to come back. It's kind of a weird choice. And it's a more, it's consistent with what we saw the first time. It's a little more simplified. I don't really have a strong opinion on the design other than why I just don't know why we got more Baby Doll, frankly.
First of all, I want to say kudos to you for the incredibly sincere delivery of that commentary on Baby Doll. I was like, wait, he and I talked about it. It's bad. What is he doing? And then you just came through and just killed it with the deadpan sarcasm. I love it. You did a better job on that than they did on Baby Doll. I also don't have big feelings other than I honestly can't believe that they took a terrible idea and made her even worse. I just can't fathom it. Why are we doing it at all? But if they had to do it, why did they do it this badly? Even the voice acting is worse.
Yeah, it just I don't like the decision. This is a weird character, poorly executed twice, and worse the second time.
It's true.
So
It's true.
Yeah. Let's actually. I'd like to pivot more to the Croc design because I actually feel like I have more to say on that one. Joshua,
I mostly have questions, but yeah, there's definitely more conversation to be had about Croc. Again, Caleb, please hit me up. What are your thoughts on Killer Croc here? Because it's a big change.
Yeah, so I had noted this when I was watching, and I watched this episode twice, by the way, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy about my thoughts on this episode. But Croc is suddenly significantly more competent and articulate and much more of a viable threat, whereas in the past he was always like a big dumb oaf who is just served as comedic relief. So the fact that they sort of try to change him from a character perspective, I think is kind of an interesting choice. That said, the redesign is fine. He looks even more like a crocodile than he did before. They were definitely swinging to how do we make him more threatening and intimidating and scary. And to that end, I think it's a success. It's not really a better version or a worse version as much as it's a different version of Killer Croc.
Yeah, that seems right. I think I agree with that. I'm honestly a little surprised that we didn't get something like this the first time around in Batman the Animated Series. I always was a little confused by turning him into just largely idiot comic relief, you know? I mean, he was dangerous but stupid in his first appearance, and then I kind of think every time we saw him after that, he was stupid but dangerous, you know? Like they just flipped the percentages around. This is more like what I would have expected. More monstrous, not a genius, but more canny, you know, just more threatening in all kinds of ways, which, as you say, is not really better or worse than the comic relief that we got before. It's just different. I do think that it works a lot better for this episode than the idiot comic relief would have. Like for whatever they're doing in this episode, which I question every choice they make from top to bottom, but if they were going to do what this episode was doing, this version of Croc is better for that. But that's about the most positive thing I can say about it.
Well, I mean, I would say they had to make him that way for Baby Doll to empathize with him or sympathize with him, because big dumb oaf, there's not really a lot to sympathize with. It's just like, oh, that idiot got arrested. And here she heard him plead his case, and he had to do that articulately in order for her to say, he's on to something. There's something there.
Yeah. Right. And so, you know, we've seen this a little bit before in the design when we got Bane kind of randomly reintroduced and they were like, oh, he was too goofy before and now we have to make him scary. And he did look cooler, but he also kind of lost some intrinsic Bane-ness. I don't think we can say the same thing about Croc, but this, as far as losing some essential Crocness, but this does feel like kind of if you loved the previous version of him, this feels like a character assassination in order to get the version they needed for this episode. So if you're mad about this switch in Croc, I'm not. But if you are, I can sympathize because this episode is bad and it's not worth ruining Croc if you feel like they did in order to get to this plot. Because this plot is gross and bad.
Joshua, I think the entire diehard fandom of Croc fans, specifically Croc fans from Batman the Animated Series, are livid about this change. It's a betrayal of the core character. I'm sure they're super up in arms about it.
Brother, listen, I'm just trying to remember that every single character is somebody's favorite somewhere.
It's true.
I mean,
that's a good point.
The jaw drops that happen whenever somebody asks me who my favorite superhero is, thinking that they already know the answer. And then when I say, oh, it's Patsy Walker Hellcat, and 90% of them go, who? I mean, just using myself as an example, everybody is somebody's favorite. So I'm assuming that there's some Croc lovers out there that felt like this was a terrible choice. And I feel them, honestly. Like, he's more dangerous, but if they made these changes to get this garbage episode, I don't think it's a good idea.
Juice is not worth the squeeze. if you want to talk a little bit about this episode, Joshua, I want to start off by saying, here's what I think the intention was.
Yes, I would love to hear this. What do you think they meant to do?
Well, there's this, and I'm sure as a writer, you're familiar with this sort of idea that, hey, we've got these two subplots that just feel like they lack momentum and they aren't going anywhere. So what if we find a way, creatively, in a way that makes sense, to combine these two subplots to make it more intriguing? The whole take two negatives, make a positive type of thing. Game of Thrones, a show that I podcasted about for years and generally love most of the time, I did this frequently, and it worked mostly to positive effect, I would say. I feel like they have no idea what the process was, but I bet they probably had a list of characters that they were thinking about for the redesign, and they had so many episodes they had to fulfill, and eventually they get to Croc, and they're like, well, Croc's had... I mean, let's be honest, he's not really strong enough to carry his own episode. I mean, even if you look back in the original animated series, most of the episodes he was in, he was a support character into another villain's scheme. Not all the time. I think the first time we meet him, he's solo. And Baby Doll, as you and I already discussed, was kind of a disaster. I don't know what possessed the writers to think, well, let's bring back Baby Doll. But I imagine it was probably characters on a corkboard somewhere. They're like, all right, here's all the characters we've got to play with. Okay, so we got Croc and we got Baby Doll. What? Okay, and we just don't think they have enough in them to do a standalone episode for either of them. What if we put them together and make it Bonnie and Clyde, like Batman are taking out Bonnie and Clyde, and you can even do it from Baby Doll's POV via like thinking about again the Bonnie and Clyde film. So that is 100% speculative. I have no idea if that's what actually happened, but that's the only way I can justify how we got this episode in the first place. Because this episode is real bad, and they put two characters that people generally aren't crazy fans of, or at least they aren't characters who carry their own episode, put them together to try to make it more dynamic and interesting. And, it was a huge failure. This episode's terrible, but that's kind of what I think may have happened. Thoughts?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there are two thematic things that tie Baby Doll and Croc together, and this episode looks square in the face of one of them and then just nods at the other one, and they shouldn't have because it's really gross and terrible. So the one that actually kind of works is that they are both outsiders, underestimated, downtrodden. They don't belong to a normal society, of course, because they're supervillains. Now, here's where we trend into the gross part. They don't fit into society because they both have physical defects or disabilities or physical deformities, whatever way it makes sense to look at that. Or they both suffer from a disease that results in same, because whatever's happening to Croc is kind of a moving target. Sometimes it's a disease, sometimes it's a mutation. So one of these makes sense. We're outsiders working together. Nobody else will have us, so we'll have each other. But then it just becomes terrible, ableist nonsense put into the frame of a romance angle that is just gross no matter how you slice it. No matter how you approach it, it's disgusting.
Baby Doll is technically an adult, but still, whenever just her whole shtick and the way that Croc calls her babe at one point, skin crawling. Oh, it's gross.
Right. She is. Okay, it's worth saying. She absolutely is a consenting adult. That's true. However, the way that this is portrayed with her, being diminutive and childlike in stature and then dressing like a stereotypical, baby doll and then talking in that goo goo gaga voice, like it's technically not a problem, but in execution, it really grosses me out. And it grosses me out both ways. I don't understand Croc's attraction, which turns out to be largely feigned, so okay. But I don't really understand Baby Doll's either. It'd be one thing if she wanted to be partners, but this is an actual literal alligator man now who eats raw chickens whole, like right in front of her. And he's mean and abusive to her. And I don't know. I'm really uncomfortable with both directions of this romance plot, and it makes the fact that they thought a baby doll episode was a good idea all over again even more questionable. Okay, friends, Caleb and I so often come to these, even the ones that we find kind of lackluster, and try to find something we like. There is nothing to redeem this episode. There is not one good choice in it, and I will go to the mattresses over that fact.
I mean, I agree. I don't even think the Bonnie and Clyde angle I pitched was that intriguing. I think that's probably what they were going for. They even say it in the text of the episode. They call them Gotham's Bonnie and Clyde.
But we've seen that done better with Harley and Ivy.
Exactly.
I mean, just to show you that even the choices in this episode that are kind of okay or kind of make sense, we've seen done better by this group of creators. It's so phoned in. I'm just thunderstruck at the poor quality of this episode. Never mind that on top of that poor quality, there's a host of problematic ideas.
These characters have zero chemistry. It just none of it's there. And I don't want to necessarily jump right to the end, but I also have to say, Joshua, this episode feels like it's missing a scene. It just kind of ends suddenly with kind of a weird moral of the story question from Baby Doll.
Yeah.
But it still even with that, I still felt like, okay, there's got to be another scene or something. It just ends right in the middle of an action sequence. It's bizarre.
I'll tell you why that upsets me so much, because at this point, I am legitimately upset at this episode. It's gross and problematic and didn't need to exist. And by God, if you were going to do it, at least do it well. But they don't. And it's this final scene or final line that really just moves me from annoyance to anger, because this is the second time that the new Batman Adventures has used a final scene or a final line to try and tack on some meaning, some deeper theme to an otherwise execrable episode. And of course, we're talking about the one you and I last covered from New Batman Adventures, Torch Song. Literally the same mediocre trick. I'm just about to declare that we're in the nadir of creativity on New Batman Adventures.
Well, fortunately for you and I think we can agree there are some better episodes on the way before we hit the end of the run. But yes, I definitely think we are in the valley of the New Batman Adventures, where they clearly are running. I definitely feel I feel like the last maybe 2 or 3 of these since Over the Edge, maybe, where they are really just fulfilling episode contracts. They're like, all right, they want this, the studio wants this many episodes, so we're just cranking them out. And and anytime you do that, there are always some that are a lot stronger, and there's some that are a lot weaker. Whenever you're writing and creating that many episodes, there's always going to be some that your writers and directors are going to gravitate towards that are going to be stronger. There's no doubt about that. But what we're seeing here is several episodes consecutively that just feel like, man, they just wanted to get this one out. And they didn't really think too hard about it, because these are not good. This and Torch Song, not great.
Yeah, and I feel like the sort of downward trend that Torch Song sets up just hits the bottom of the barrel and keeps digging here. I don't want to just keep beating up on it. I just don't have anything else to say except that this episode is really bad, and it's really bad on at least 2 or 3 levels, and we know these creators can do better. We know that they can do better. And maybe they were just, poisoned from jump, being forced by somebody somewhere to use Baby Doll and Croc to get, I don't know. It's bad. It's bad.
I gotta say, Joshua, I've watched a couple of different Batman Beyond recently. Had some sort of anniversary, and I watched a few different behind the scenes making of videos, and the way that whole show came together it's a wild sort of story that I'm sure we'll talk about on another day. But the way that Bruce Timm and Paul Dinion, the people, the creative forces driving this show talk about it, it's like they were having a lot of fun making this show, and all of a sudden they had to stop to make Batman Beyond. And I was like, yeah, that sucks, But honestly, in retrospect, I'm like, man, maybe that was the best thing that could have happened to both of these series, because Batman Beyond opens up a lot of fresh creative ideas that just frankly, it feels like we're at the bottom of the well right now in the New Batman Adventures.
That's an interesting look at the timing. I'm not prepared myself to go research exactly when things launched and air dates and stuff. But it would be really interesting if, I mean, look, listeners, I love you all. That's just more research than I'm prepared to do on this cartoon to excuse the fact that this episode is absolute hot garbage. But it is interesting, and you're probably onto something. Like, there was just a redirection of creative energies behind the scenes. Heck, just having to come up with a Superman show every week at the same time could have done that, you know?
Yeah, no, that's the thing. And again, I think we'll have a more in-depth conversation on a future date when we're talking about, the creation of Batman Beyond. But what I'll say is apparently they were running 3 shows at the same time. They were in production on both Superman, New Batman Adventures, and then in pre-production on Batman Beyond. And Batman Beyond came together extremely quickly, as in like one season of New Batman Adventures ended, and then when the next season would have started is when they aired Beyond. So it's just
interesting. Okay,
yeah. There's a lot of overlap, and you're like, oh, these guys probably were stretched pretty thin. But again, I don't have all the information in front of me. I just a couple of takeaways and mental notes I made while watching this. I was like, huh. As we are upon this really what seems to be a valley for this particular series, and again, I know there are better episodes on the way, but it's like, at what point did the amount of stuff they had to do really impact the episodes they're making on Batman and Superman?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's probably a thing we should keep an eye out for on Superman too, as we go forward. Because we've had some there that weren't as bad as this, but that were kind of like, this is a good idea. You guys could have gone a little harder on this. I mean, Blasts from the Past is a good example on its own. Didn't really need the 2-parter. It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to know about that behind the scenes stuff, but I'm not sure there's any way for us to ask the creators that doesn't start with, so how come this part of New Batman Adventures is so bad? That's not going to get us anywhere, I don't think.
No, Joshua, it's all about the approach, man. You got to say, so tell us about, that second season of Superman, set it up. Clearly leading, but never attacking. Yes. No, exactly.
The bad one.
You never want to come at someone that you never want to go at someone. So tell me about the worst thing you made. Tell us about how that came together.
Oh man, but I kind of want to now. Okay, I'm gonna file that away for interview questions if I ever get to do any actual interviews. So, all right, Caleb, I think that's probably all we have to say about Love's a Croc. We don't recommend it. This is almost exactly the kind of thing we would have skipped if we'd been approaching the New Batman Adventures the way that we approached Batman the Animated Series. We made a conscious choice because now continuity is going to start mattering more to not skip things. But boy, this one shows me the wisdom of our previous approach, if nothing else. So, Caleb, assume that there are people watching this episode that, had glimmers of things that they might like about it, but that just simply were not realized. What alternative media recommendation would you have for those folks? What should they be reading, watching, or enjoying to try and mine a little nugget of goodness out of this?
Well, I'd say better yet, just don't even watch this episode and watch this thing I'm about to recommend to you. You don't even need to like anything about it. I can tell you
Seems
something.
right. Seems right.
I can tell you something that actually tackles the stuff this episode. I wouldn't even say the episode tackles it. So I'm speaking, of course, about a theme in this episode that didn't really go anywhere or amount to anything, which is a theme that we actually saw in the first Baby Doll episode, which is this idea that the media is somehow negatively influencing people, which, hey, I think there's something there. There's some ideas. There's definitely a conversation to be had. We've had some of them on the show. Unfortunately, this episode does absolutely nothing to say anything meaningful about that thing. But you know what does? 1994's Natural Born Killers is a movie about serial killers empowered by the media, and it stars Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis, Robert Downey Jr., Tommy Lee Jones. It is a real winner if you are at all fascinated about this idea of people being driven to commit heinous acts of murder because of the way that the media has shaped their minds. Joshua, how about you?
Well, I'm going to come at it from a similar but slightly different perspective because you're right, that warping of minds and the way the media factors in. Sure, this is the New Batman Adventures poor attempt at Natural Born Killers, but I'm going to go back 50 years into the past from Natural Born Killers and talk about a personal favorite film of mine, Double Indemnity. 1944, Billy Wilder directed, stars Fred McMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson, making that shift from sort of gangster movie stalwart to like character actor that we would see in the latter part of his career. Dialogue for this film was written by my second favorite writer of all time, Raymond Chandler. Just fantastic. There's a great anecdote about that I will not interrupt this podcast for, about how he wrote it under extreme duress. If anybody cares, come hit me up on Twitter. I'll tell it to you there. It's probably not true, but I love it anyway. And the reason that I'm recommending Double Indemnity is that at its core, this is a story about a man who thinks he's scamming a woman into doing some crimes, and then it turns out she's scamming him into doing some murders.
It's so good.
And if that's not a better approach to this episode, I don't know what would be. We just came up with 2 better approaches to this episode.
Joshua, Double Indemnity is a classic, one of the most foundational of noir films I think people should watch if they have even a passing interest in the genre. Yes, do agree. Highly recommend.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
I'm the editor-in-chief and contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We publish in-depth essays on all types of films and have a regular podcast, The Cinematic Schematic, and you can find all of those articles and podcasts at thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/Pulp Diction Productions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. Streaming overlords willing, we'll be back next time to talk about the Superman the Animated Series episode, Livewire.
Until then, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.